And I wrote some the stuff
Oh,
on my
good.
phone, so I'm not texting or anything. I'm just. Okay, so you could start by introducing yourself. Maybe say when you were born, where you were born, how old you are. Yeah.
Okay. So, hello. I am Gray's grandma and Scout's grandma and Cal's grandma and Evan's grandma and Rob and Julie's mom. My name is Sue Reese Lamb. My full name, I was born Susan Ruth Lawsine. And when I was married to Zadie, who is Rob and Julie's dad, I was Sue Lawsine Reese. Now I'm Sue Reese Lamb. I'm going to be 83 this month, and they tell me I was born in a blizzard in 1940, in February 22nd. They actually had to bring my mom to the hospital on a sled because the roads were full of 3 feet or more of snow. So that's how I came into life, and it's been a very full and very interesting life, and I'm really excited to share some of it with you.
So as far as you can look at the camera, you can look at me, whatever you is more
Okay.
comfortable. I feel like it depends sort of
Yeah.
remotely. So of the things that I wrote down, what's your earliest memory?
Oh my gosh, my very earliest memory. My very earliest memory is of standing up in the crib and trying to reach the sunlight. My mother says I couldn't possibly remember that, but I do. And the other early memories they're a lot harder because from the time I was about 4.5 until almost 9, I had nightmares every single night of my life, and I woke up screaming, and I could never remember what the nightmares were. And I can remember my dad standing over me and saying, "I don't know what we're going to do with you." And I never did find out what that was all about. So I have a theory that that's the period of time, they've done some research, and that's the period of time when children do astral travel. So I like to think about that maybe I did some astral travel. And then the other memory I have is of my brother Marty being born, and he had jaundice. He almost died because that was really serious back then. And they didn't tell me what was going on. They just brought me down to your great-grandmother's and Aunt Bettina's and left me there for 2 weeks while Marty was in the hospital, and they didn't know if he'd live. He did. So one of my early memories of that is of creeping into his room. And he was asleep in his crib, and I had a very bad cold. And this hand came down on my shoulder, and this Scotch voice said, "What are you trying to do? Kill your brother?" All of the aunts in the family, all the sisters, used this same Scottish nurse for the first 6 weeks of every one of their kids' lives. So that was my introduction to my brother. We finally got to a good relationship later in life. So those are the early memories. I think, too, I want to share that there were 9 brothers and sisters in your grandmother's maternal side of the family, and 3 brothers and a sister on your great-grandfather's paternal side of the family. I grew up with all the cousins on my mother's side, and it was a big Jewish family. Every Sunday, we would go down to Grandma and Grandpa's, and they lived on a meadow-like place. They had a dairy farm. There were horses down there. We would ride the horses on Sunday. And one of the best things of all was the Passover Seder holidays, and they were like, there would be 2 rooms, the living room and the dining room, with people, like 40, 45 people around the table. And you couldn't sit at the table until you could sit there quietly for the whole of the Passover Seder. And Grandpa was very orthodox and said the entire thing. So I remember being 3 and looking at my new patent leather shoes for a long time. Another early memory. When I was 5, they took me up. I was not feeling well. They took me up out of bed. They put me in my brother's high chair in the kitchen, and they clamped ether on me, and they took out my tonsils in my house. And the doctor who did that, the doctor who brought me into the world, was the same doctor that had delivered my mom. So, these are very olden times. And then I'm progressing. I'm thinking about growing up in school. And I remember when I was a sophomore in high school, the first or second week, being called into the principal's office and being so scared because I had no idea of what I had done. And when I got in there, and I can't remember his name, but he was a really gruff man. And he said, "You are Suzanne?" And I said, "Yes, I'm Susan." And he said, "I have something to show you." And he got this picture out, and it was a picture of him and my mother and father skating when my mother and father were in the 8th grade, because he was their history teacher. So there was a lot of sense of growing up with the people who had been part of my mom's and dad's life as well as mine. So those were some of the early memories. Oh, and then one final one. For my senior high school prom, I remember there was 3 feet of snow. So those are some of the early and childhood memories of Malden, which is where I grew up, Malden, Massachusetts.
3 feet of snow.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
It
Was it fun?
was, yeah.
Who'd you go with?
Oh, what was his name? Oh gosh, Alan Gold something. He was a good dancer.
So there's 2 questions. What's a quality that you've had your entire life? And then the next question is, what's a quality that you once had that you thought was sort of in your nature or permanent to you, but you realized was not?
What a couple of great questions. What's a quality I've had all my life? There's actually, that to me comes into what are my values, and I think a lot about that. And there are 3 things that I think are the most important to me. One is being authentic, and also being in relationship with people who are authentic. One is kindness, being kind, and the third one is compassion. And I think I have been compassionate and tried to be kind all of my life. It took me a long time to get to the place where I was really authentic and wasn't trying to perform for my parents or beyond. And I think something that I probably valued a lot more and demonstrated a lot more was intellectual curiosity and capability. I still sort of have it together, but as I grew older, I valued that. I valued the sense of continuing to learn, always being in a learning mode. That's always been important to me. But I also changed, I guess what I would say is I changed the focus of what was important to me. And learning facts was no longer important to me. Learning to really be in deep relationship and to understand people and to listen deeply became much more important.
Were you good in school as a kid?
Yeah, I was really good in school. I was valedictorian. I did all the things I was supposed to do, and my poor brother suffered for it because he wasn't as much of a student. But, you know, during those years, again, that was when I was into an overachieving mode, and I would say those are the things that became much less important to me.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the trajectory. But not everybody goes that trajectory.
No. In fact, there's a lot of people who I think still. I've been doing a lot of reading lately by Bill Plotkin. I don't know if you know him. He was a psychologist. He is a clinical psychologist and a philosopher, and he used to practice more traditionally. But in his later years, he became very, very interested in the wilderness and what the earth has to teach us. And he now thinks in terms of middle land, which is where most of us spend our time going to work, interacting with neighbors, you know, the typical day-to-day life. And then he talks about spirit as the universal connector between all of us, and that spirit is sort of an ascendancy thing. And he says soul, and that's the name of one of his books, is Soulcraft. And he talks about how that's the going deeper down into yourself, and that each one of us has what he calls an echo niche, which is to find that spot that helps us determine what is our real passion in life. What is it that we're here to create this time around? And for me, I believe that what I was here to create this time around had to do with deep listening and compassion and doing the work that I learned to do through NTL Institute, which is in its heyday, trained thousands and thousands of people in how to really listen to each other, how to be authentic and share feedback, how to deal with conflict and all of those kinds of human relationship skills. And that's been my passion all my life. So, and NTL, when I went to my first program, which was in 1972, it was a 2-week-long program, and I felt like I was reborn. I mean, that's when I thought, oh, these are my people. I've met my tribe. And I also met Howard there, too, who is your great-grandfather, step-grandfather. And then became very involved in organization development consulting, and that was my graduate work. And between the two of us, we were in, I don't know how many countries, and we were in over 400 different organizations over 40 years. And I want to talk a little bit about some of my favorites, if that's okay, because we had time in Pakistan, we had time in Afghanistan, we had time in India, as well as all over the United States and Canada, and some work in Costa Rica. But each culture, each experience was so different, and I just feel like I was very, very blessed to have so many different kinds of exposures. I mean, I learned so much about different cultures, including Native American culture, which I became very interested in. And I actually have a prayer pipe that was blessed by my Indian medicine teacher, a Chippewa, named Sun Bear. And to show you the difference in the kinds of consulting we did, one week we were in San Francisco and we were working with AT&T and their vice presidents, and then and we were dealing with things like the power issues and the communication issues. And the very next week we were up in what's the name of it, Spirit Mountain in Spokane, Washington, and we were working with Sun Bear, the Chippewa medicine man, and his tribe. And it was the same issues, power and communication, but it was just different. It was like, so who's going to clean the outhouse, as opposed to the issues we were dealing with down in San Francisco. So we got to work with so many different kinds of people, and everybody from like CEOs to maintenance people. We worked with nuclear plants for a decade. And I remember once being the only woman with 200 men around in a maintenance staging area. So very different work experiences.
So did you meet Grandpa Howard that first 2 weeks?
In NTL. Yeah. Do you want me to keep talking or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I didn't pause anything.
Oh, okay. Well,
but so you said you went to a 2 week
program.
course.
Yeah, and
I
met him there, and I thought he was very good. And then I first was married to Zadie, of course, and Zadie and I had met at Tufts University when I was there, and then by the time I met Howard, Zadie and I were just about to get divorced, and I didn't even think about Howard for about another 6 months. And I was a single parent, and I got a phone call, and the phone call was asking me if I would take part in a training program that would then be used in our community. It was back in the time of drug prevention with National Institute of Drug Abuse. And we were doing sort of a cinema verite with a group of neighbors, friends, kids, and elders would meet together and then talk about what kept them from using drugs or encouraged them to use drugs, etc. Anyhow, I said, no, don't bother me. I'm too busy. I've just gone back to graduate school and I've gotten divorced. I'm a single parent. And they said, well, it's too bad because it's a free weekend of training with, and I said, well, who's doing it? And they said Howard Lamb and Mandy Lerner. And I thought, oh, he was really good. So I decided to go to that weekend, and I went through the training, and I asked him, I said, I've decided that when I grow up, I want to be a member of NTL. And who are the people who are sort of the honchos there? And he did this big Cheshire grin. And he said, well, I'm on the central staff, so keep in touch. And I didn't through all my graduate school. So for 2.5 years, I wasn't in touch with him. And then I wrote him one of those "you won't remember me but" letters. And I invited him to go to lunch with me and tell me what I could do about becoming an NTL member. So we met for lunch, and I was so excited to see him because for me, all through those 2.5 years, whenever I was doing process facilitation, I would say, what would Howard do here? He was sort of like, my mentor. And so being an extrovert, I said, oh, I'm so glad to see you, and sort of threw my arms around him. And he said, bullshit, you just want to use me. So that's how we started our relationship. And we started to do some work together, and eventually decided, this was many years later, about probably 15 years later, we decided we did not want to do separate projects anymore, and we just wanted to work together. So from 1990 on, we just did team work. We charged one fee for the two of us. So we were together for 47 years. We worked together, and for 40 years we were married. It was our 40th anniversary the year he died. So do we want to close that door?
I didn't even notice it was open.
Yeah, I could. What happened was Bodie came in. You didn't even see him. He came in to check out what was going on.
No.
So, how are we doing? What about time? What's
We're good. This thing can go. I mean, it varies a little bit, but it looks like I have like at least 15 more minutes.
Good. Okay.
Of memory on here.
Yeah. Good.
So I just thought of a question. What was like going through a divorce like? Because I feel like, well, I don't know. I've been through like a breakup. It's not the same, obviously, but
Yeah. Well, it was going through a divorce at that time. Of course, nobody got divorced back then. That was really a bad thing to do. And I would lie in bed at night, and I had no idea what divorce court was like, but I imagined the judge would be way up somewhere high on a podium, and I was way down here. And he would ask me all these questions like, well, is he a good father? Is he a good husband? Do you have a good sex life? Does he provide for you? And, all these different questions. And I would say, yes, 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 yes. And the judge would say to me, what do you want, lady? And I would say, I want to have intimate communication. And that's just not what he's interested in. So it seemed to some people very foolish, including my mother and father at that time. But for me, it was really important to have that connection. And so there was a lot of sadness. There was guilt. He moved out and bought a house very close by so that we could have the kids go back and forth. And he was a very good father, always has been. And we tried to keep friendly relations between us for the kids' sake, too. And now, in our later years, we're friendly and it's okay to be together, but it was very hard for the kids. And yeah, so it's a guilt I carry. No, I don't feel guilty. I feel regretful because I know that a divorce has a very lasting impact on others as well as just the individuals involved. So, yeah. And it was the right decision for me. Howard was my soulmate. So, I wanted to say a little bit about being a part of the civil rights in the 60s, because that was that was a very impactful time for me. I had always been so concerned about social justice, and NTL had a lot of programs in that way. But a couple of the things that were sort of unique for me were a woman from Canada and we were both white. We started a Girl Scout troop for all black little girls in our neighborhood. So at first the parents were sort of suspicious about us, but eventually they realized that our hearts were in the right place and they got involved. So that was the first thing. And then the other thing I did, and this was when my kids were really very small, but I got very active in fair housing in Arlington County. And I can remember going into northwestern Arlington, knocking on doors to ask people to sign a petition for fair housing and being spit on. And yet, when I took a job, which was mainly with dropouts and it was all dropouts and kicked outs from the regular school system. This was with the adult ed section. Excuse me. And we went down to the ghetto to get recruits because they would go to school one week and they'd go to work the next week. They had partners. And I can remember being invited into the homes of these black women and offered iced tea and so forth. And at the same time, I was campaigning in the north of Arlington about fair housing. And I thought, interesting contrast. So, and that was my first real job other than, make money for school jobs. And I loved it. And I had, probably about 48 kids between the ages of 14 and 21. It was under the adult ed program in Arlington, and I did it for 3 years. This was when I was a single parent, and Rob and Julie got to meet a lot of different kids during that time. But I loved the work, and I loved working with those kids, and they got their GEDs. So let's see, anything else? Oh, and then just one other thing that just right now I'm tutoring a little girl from Ethiopia who's 7 years old, and we were reading the story of Martin Luther King. And when we got to the picture in the book of Martin Luther King speaking at the Lincoln Memorial, I said to her, Ella, I was there. I was actually there in that audience. And it seems like it was a very long time ago, but it was a highlight of my life. And also having JFK be elected president, and then the sadness of being at his funeral. But I was right there in D.C. for all of those kinds of events. So let's see. I think those are the most important things around that. Oh, I want to tell you one story. This is from OD Consulting Time. We were working with, it was the largest wholesale and retail operation in New England. And we were working with a store in Portland, their warehouse, as well as helping them design a new facility in New York. And they were unionized. And I remember that the first day we met with them, we were going to do team building. Excuse me. And one of the members of the team was this big, he was the union steward. He was about 6'3", and big guy, and he was sitting there. This was 6 o'clock in the morning, sitting there absolutely rolling his eyes at us. And then we worked with them for 6 months, helping them learn how to redesign their work so it could be done more efficiently, and helping them become change agents, internal change agents. So skip ahead to a year and a half when the project was finished, and they asked if I could do something that would sort of ritualize our saying goodbye. And I said, well, sure. I said, I like to talk to rocks. So I brought in a big box of rocks, and I said, pick a rock. They picked a rock, and we sat in a circle, and I said, look at the rock and talk about what qualities does it remind you of in this experience? What are you sad to say goodbye about? What are you celebrating? So when it got to Denny, he was bawling, and he says, oh shit, I can't believe I'm crying. Oh shit. And he went through his spiel, and then afterwards he says to me, Ms. Reese, you think we could do this with the meat department next week? I said, no, Denny, I think you have to kind of build up to this. But Denny is now a vice president in that organization, and he was.
Okay.
So I've saved my two favorite parts of my life for the last. And that's the birth of my kids, and then watching my grandkids as they grew. Rob was born in 1961 and Julie in 1963. And it was the most amazingly wonderful little neighborhood that we had with there were at least 16 kids the same ages as Rob and Julie, and a lot of very educated people. I think I had an undergraduate degree at the time. I think I was the least educated of the moms. But we had a neighborhood play school and a babysitting club, and we just really had a good time together with our kids for the first couple of years. And Rob's best friend was John Kahn, and John Kahn and Rob were pretty inseparable. His mother was Jean Herr, and she had a baby, Serena, just when I had my second baby, Julie. So the kids were the same age. So my favorite stories of the kids when they were really small are Jean and I were sitting in her backyard and we were playing with the babies. The babies were on the grass. And John Kahn and Rob were around the corner. We couldn't see them, but we could hear them. They were playing around, they were playing Gas Station Man with Jean's car. And eventually we went out to check on them, and it turned out that they had filled Jean's gas tank with sand. So that was one of my favorite stories of Rob when he was small. And another one, this just popped into my head. Julie had just bought her first bikini. We had gone shopping. And we were members of the Overly Pool back then, and she was prancing around in her new bikini. And Rob came marching up the stairs, and he said to me, "You're not going to let her go out of the house looking like that, are you?" So those two quick stories for Rob. And we moved from that wonderful neighborhood to the 21st Street house where the kids mainly grew up when Julie was just a toddler. And she was sitting on the stairs. This was a 2-story house. And every time we said, "Julie, let's go upstairs and do..." "No." "Julie, come on, we're going to go upstairs. You'll see your bedroom." "No, I don't want to see my bedroom." And finally we said, "Julie, we got to get upstairs and get changed and everything." And she started crying. She said, "I don't want to go upstairs." And we said, "Why?" She said, "Because you said there was a giraffe up there." We had said there was a draft upstairs. So she had decided that she was not ever going to go upstairs because there was a giraffe. And the other one was that comes to mind quickly is the day she locked herself into her bedroom, and I could not find a key. I remember there were these little strange things that I had put somewhere, but I forgot where. Couldn't find them. So, and I remembered that the window was open in her room. This is the second story. So I called the fire department, and I kept sending Rob downstairs to get lollipops and stuck them under the door so that she would eat the lollipops and stay near the door until the firemen got there. And finally, when they got there, they said, "Oh yes, it's one of these doors." It had a special little key. They opened it, and she looked up and she said, "Are you the man that lets me out? Thank you." And then they grew up too fast. And of course, they're the grown-up cousins that you know today. And so Howard and I were in California from 1980 to 2000. And what brought us back was actually realizing that the grandkids were going to be when Scout was born. And one of the things that I will never forget is the expression. The first time I saw Rob, I was coming to the hospital to see Scout, and Rob's face was, he looked like he was shell-shocked. And he said to me, "They don't prepare you. They just don't prepare you for how it's going to feel." And that was his reaction to becoming a father. And watching each one of you come to life and being able to be a real part of at least your first 10 to 12 years. And the weekends at St. Asaph Street, when we built the Cousins Club, and we had, do you remember the Lego buildings and the pool table with the train set on it, and everybody sleeping up at the stairs except for poor Evan, who had to sleep downstairs with Grandma when she snored. But those were very special years, and I'm so glad I was able to be such a constant part of that. So, and the thing I loved best was because we did not celebrate Christmas itself with you guys, we always got the first weekend in December. And that was when there was the parade, and there were all the different activities in Alexandria and the stockings. And so you got to open all your presents that first weekend in December. And I never had to worry about returning anything because there were so many grandparents who were going to be giving presents on Christmas, but I was there first. So, anyhow, those are some of the quick remembrances. And I just feel like it was so the right move to come back here because we had thought we were going to retire in California, but I wouldn't have missed these years for anything. So, and I did tell you I was going to tell you about Big Bird to finish off. One of the things I'm proudest of in terms of, in addition to the roles of mom and grandmom, is the work I have done with NTL, because so much of it has, I think, helped people empower themselves. And one of the things I developed is a year-long training of trainer program for NTL members if they want to train others. And it's, for the last decade and a half, it's been a big part of what I've done. And recently, this past September, as you know, I was diagnosed with end-stage cancer. And the way I have wanted to deal with that is to be totally open and to share with others what I'm going through, and to try the best I can to live day by day, because none of us know what time we have left. Nobody does, but I especially, or anybody else who's been given this diagnosis, we don't know if the next day is going to be as good as this one. Anyhow, the two of the programs that I've conducted that were year-long, they both made videos to share with me the impact that I've had on their lives. And it's almost like hearing your eulogy before you die, and it's been so meaningful to me. And so one of the women wrote that she always thinks of me as Big Bird, because Big Bird cares about learning and helps people learn, and also just sort of holds them under their wings. So she sent me Big Bird to remind me of that. And where I am at this point is, you've heard the poem As I Lay Dying, and the motto that has come to me is As I Live Dying. And I'm really trying to live each day until the day comes when they say it's your time. And I think that's probably a good place to stop.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I think I got to say most of what I wanted to say. Is there anything that you wanted to ask me to? Were there surprises for you?